Let's take a listen.
Efforts of reconstruction and economic recovery, and the meetings he had held enabled him, my envoy, to shed light on the key requirements in terms of finance and also convincing Lebanon's partners in taking part in the reconstruction and economic recovery. These meetings will be continued next week with the Lebanese officials. At the beginning, we will be meeting with Lebanon's friends to support the reforms and reconstruction efforts which were triggered and launched by the Lebanese authorities, and also the financial supports for the reconstruction, apart from the reforms to the banking sector, which is key to convincing partners taking part in the process. At the same time, it is possible to reconvene a new conference in Paris for the economic recovery and reconstruction, yet it should be linked to the conditions laid down by the International Monetary Fund for the economic and financial recovery. In addition to that, our meetings are focused on reforming the judiciary, and you know France's commitment to this issue. Meetings will be followed in Beirut to discuss the reforms to the judiciary. There are other priorities in terms of our dealings. They involve the energy sector, considering that it is a vital sector for stability and economic recovery in Lebanon, also for attracting foreign investment. In addition to that, France will contribute with strategic mega project in this sector. At the beginning of my statement, you said you believe in France's commitment to Lebanon's restoring sovereignty, and I reiterate that Israel's attacks on Lebanon this morning are unacceptable. What is taking place is unjust and it is not helpful. That's why France will continue to stand by you to maintain and ensure your sovereignty and security. This is what we wish to do in the south and alongside the border lines with Syria, considering that the situation there is very fluid. France will continue to stand by Lebanon's side. France is also committed in these projects together with the United States and the United Nations to support the ceasefire reached on November 7th, the year last. The Lebanese army has been deployed almost in the entire south of Lebanon, and we ensure that there is no presence of Hezbollah, and we also support your efforts for the unlawful carrying of arms. We also would like to reiterate that there should be no unilateral actions by Hezbollah in terms of violating the ceasefire. These dynamics must continue, and the parties must honor and respect their obligations in order not to undermine the achievements made. And the Israeli forces must pull out from the 5 points in the south of Lebanon, and residents are allowed to be back to their homes. In addition to that, certain expectations are placed on both Lebanon and Israel. However, we proposed that the UNIFIL be deployed in the said 5 spots under Israel's control, and where there will be a mechanism for monitoring the ceasefire overseen by both France and the United States. In addition to that, I spoke to President Aoun on the means to raise the standards of living and improve living conditions together with the United Nations, in addition to the release of the Israeli prisoners kept by Israel. France supports dialogue and all the efforts aiming at restoring stability and security in the region. We are committed to the path initiated by the American partners, and I would like to emphasize that the Lebanese and the Israelis. The Lebanese and Israeli sides must engage in these dialogues in order to reinforce their respective sovereignty. We also discussed the issue of cooperation with Syria. This meeting also started with some talks with the Syrian President, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara, and it comes as part of the continuation of the discussions initiated between Lebanon and Syria. We reiterated the necessity to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and Syria, and also the initiation of the process of marcation of border lines between the two countries. France proposed to be a facilitator to this process and to oversee meanwhile. The issue of Syrian refugees and their voluntary return to Syria was also part of the discussions made with both the presidents, and France presented their proposal in this respect. The Cyprus and Greek prime ministers joined the discussions, and these five-part discussions tackled the issue of security, border lines, return of refugees, and also rallying support to all the process, in addition to laying down a clear roadmap plan involving the 5 countries that took part in the meeting today. This unprecedented regional cooperation is significant for working towards reinforcing Lebanon's sovereignty and restoring security and stability in the region. During my visit, I have seen the high hopes in the eyes of the Lebanese, and I believe today Lebanon is standing on the right course. Mr. President, it is with pleasure that we should continue in this path in order to restore stability and security in the Middle East, and also restore the rights of all the residents in the region, including Lebanon. We hope this can be achieved after years and years of violence. We'll stand by your side to ensure your tenure is a success. It is my pleasure, Mr. President, also to host you on this official visit, which is a representation of the unshaken friendship bonding both France and Lebanon that will enable us to continue the work we initiated over the past week. Thank you again, Mr. President, for heeding the call and being here present personally today. And again, I reiterate France's support and friendship to you and your country. Thank you, Mr. President, my friend. Unfortunately, we received the bad news of the resumption of the Israeli aggression on our country and the capital. It is idiomatic that we declare our condemnation as well as our rejection of any aggression on Lebanon or any malicious attempt to bring Lebanon back into the vicious circle of violence. What is taking place makes us more adamant to continue to maintain our sovereignty on the entire Lebanese territories and reinforce our Lebanese army. And from here, I appeal to all the friends of Lebanon, from Paris to Washington, to swiftly act to prevent the situation from exacerbating and enable Lebanon to honor all the international resolution on all the Lebanese home soil. Mr. President, I thank you for your generous invite, your generous hospitality and warm reception, and thank you to you and France for much you have been doing and the great efforts to end the presidential vacuum in Lebanon and enable us to achieve this constitutional obligation, and also your support in October 27 agreement, laying down practical measures for the implementation of Resolution 1701, whereby it was possible to have a ceasefire and take Lebanon out of this vicious circle of violence. And I also hail your contribution to the UNIFIL and your sacrifices for the peace and security in the south of Lebanon. Thank you, and the list goes on and on. I say the list is long, it is endless, I say, as it started in year 1250 with King Louis IX message. Centuries of cooperation and friendship. It is true, my friend Macron. And as we continue to mention these historical occasions, in a few days, on 1957 April, it is the 50th anniversary of the multi-fold war, foreign and domestic, followed by a series of war that has touched each and every household, ending with the destruction of all. We recall it today, and we hope we will be able to prevent it from reoccurring. Yet, there are certain requirements from us as Lebanese citizens, officials, and as state authorities. First, to rebuild a sovereign, robust, strong state, protected and safeguarded by its army and augmented by the harmony of its people. Allow me to be more open and frank. Unfortunately, Lebanon today is broken unprecedented world records, the highest percentages of refugees and displaced compared to our population, the biggest financial crisis compared to the GDP. It has impacted the private banks, the central banks, the state, as well as the bank depositors. Also, the highest percentage of violated border lines. We hope that we'll be able to address and remedy all these crises all at once to restore prosperity and welfare. And this is what we appeal to you, Mr. President. For example, a poll by the UN Commission for Refugees shows that 24 of the Syrian refugees are willing to voluntarily go back to their country, which means about 400,000 Syrian refugees. All what they need is an international plan for financing the return. It is much expensive than their continued stay in Lebanon, which will continue to undermine our economy and theirs. This is what we started negotiating with the concerned parties. Our financial and banking crisis, we started a path to exit in cooperation with the IMF and World Bank and other international financial institutions, as well as our friends and partners. And we wish to see France's support in this respect, which we are certain we will. In terms of our sovereignty over our home soil, it is a necessary and fine path. We started to go forward, and we also understand that you understand the sensitivity of this path, and we would like you to explain the same to the whole world, whereby all our occupied territories are liberated, our border lines are restored and fortified, and international resolutions be implemented, and the 1949 agreement be back into effect, which was a result of a binding UN resolution under Chapter 7. However, all this is not sufficient to throttle any possibility of war. We need a stable region. Peace and stability cannot be based, but not on justice. And justice means reciprocal rights. And the rights of the Palestinians has been pending in the affection of the region and the peoples. It is time to restore this right, being a humane right in the first place, and also to restore stability and security in the region, and also secure the strategic interest of the entire world, which are linked to this critical part of the planet. And finally, to bury the hatchet once and for all, which requires a rule of law, principles, and the good, the greater good, and you, Mr. President, together with France and the Republic of the Declaration of August 1987, can easily understand that people are born and live free and equal in rights. We in Lebanon most prepared to epitomize this by our co-living, freedom, diversity, and our exceptional ability to continue to survive, live, and create. My dear Mr. Manuel, I end my message with one word that I shrink 700 plus years of partnership, and this word is thank you.
Right, well, we've just been listening to a meeting there between the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, both speaking on historic ties between both countries. But of course, all of this is in the wake of Israeli airstrikes that have been carried out on the southern suburb of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Just to sum up some of the things that were said, Emmanuel Macron saying that the Israeli strikes earlier today on Beirut, he said, violate the ceasefire agreement. He called it unacceptable, unjust, and not helpful. And then you have the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun also condemning what he called the Israeli aggression, saying that he is adamant to maintain the country's sovereignty and to stick to the resolution as well as the 1949 agreement. For more on all of this, let's speak to Ali Rizk, who's a journalist joining us from the capital, Beirut, where that airstrike happened. I don't know if you had a chance to listen in to those statements, but definitely a condemnation there from the French President Emmanuel Macron on the airstrike, saying that this constitutes a violation of the ceasefire agreement.
Indeed, the harsh remarks made by the French president in particular, I think, were noticeable, and understandably so, because this time it's not southern Lebanon, it's the capital, Beirut. And when the capital in particular is targeted, that undermines the status or undermines the position of the new Lebanese leadership. President Joseph Aoun, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and you're talking about players or politicians who are allies of the West, whether it be France, Saudi Arabia, or the United States. All of these countries supported Joseph Aoun and supported Nawaf Salam. And what happened today, as I said, because Beirut has this special symbolism, you're talking about the capital of the country, so it has a much bigger adverse or negative impact on the standing of the new Lebanese leadership compared to strikes on the south, for example. But I think more importantly, what we should wait and anticipate is the American reaction. Now, due to the time difference, there hasn't been a clear American stance, according to my knowledge, as of yet. We have to wait and see what the Americans have to say. Are they going to use the usual slogan saying that Israel has the right to defend itself, as we're accustomed to? Or is there going to be some kind of a different tone, as I said, given that this undermines Washington's allies and the West allies general in Lebanon? So let's wait and see. And we also have to wait and see what Sheikh Naim Qasim has to say, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who's expected to speak in exactly an hour from now. So I think we have to follow up the developments which are going to take place in the next few hours. But indeed, what sets this apart, the attacks on Beirut, is how it relates to the new Lebanese leadership and how it undermines their position.
Let's just tackle some of those, a couple of those points that you just mentioned there. You mentioned that it will be interesting to wait for the US reaction. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, did actually mention the US and its role in ensuring that this ceasefire is abided by, of course, by both sides. This is clearly an agreement that was made to ensure the disarmament of Hezbollah. There's also been a lot of changes within Lebanon, certainly in the last few weeks, with a new government, a new president, new prime minister, and also Hezbollah not having the control it's had in the government.
Yes, indeed. The situation has drastically changed, but the Israelis, they continue to bombard and to violate the agreement. Today, as I said, it stands out. One point we have to, by the way, focus on is that one of the pretexts which was given by the Israelis as to why they chose to target this building in Dahi in southern Beirut was that it stored drones. Now, that's separate from any reaction to missiles being launched. That's a completely different pretext or reason. So then the question which arises is this going to become a new kind of norm? Meaning that are the Israelis going to carry out additional attacks on southern Beirut under that pretext of Hezbollah storing arms? So again, it's very important to cite that particular reason or that pretext which was given by the Israeli side. Is this now a prelude or the start of a new phase whereby the Lebanese capital is going to be targeted time and time again? Maybe not in the same intensity as we saw during that September to November period, but nevertheless, a new tempo which is taking place. Again, that's going to rely heavily, I think, on what Washington chooses to do or the stance Washington chooses to take. What we heard in the previous weeks, the last few weeks, is that Beirut was off limits and that the Americans had given assurances to the Lebanese side that Beirut won't be struck, won't be hit. That's a report.
And Ali, of course, this was as there has been diplomatic talks between the new government and, of course, the US administration that comes now under Donald Trump. But back to the second point that you had made earlier was about hearing from the Secretary General of Hezbollah. Now, what we do know so far is that Hezbollah has said, in terms of those rockets that were sent over across from Lebanon into Israel earlier today, wasn't them. And also in terms of the rockets from a few days ago, they also claimed that that wasn't them. Israel seems to think differently.
Look, Israel is going to blame. It's no surprise that Israel is putting the blame of Hezbollah, particularly when it sees itself as being in a much stronger position vis-a-vis Hezbollah than it was in the past. It perceives that it has far more freedom of movement or freedom of maneuver compared to previous times, and understandably so, because Hezbollah, we have to admit, is nowhere near the force it was before the latest escalation during that September to November period, that full-scale war which was launched. So the Israelis, it's no surprise, they view that the momentum is on their side, and they also view, I think, and this is another important point, that the Trump administration is going to give them the green light or is not going to stand in their way if they wanted to escalate. Now, if that happens, I think it's very interesting because the perception before was that the Biden administration was far too lenient. Netanyahu was taking advantage of Biden's leniency, and hence Netanyahu was able to launch a full-scale war on Lebanon. Is a similar scenario playing out right now? What some people thought was that Trump is going to be far more firm in dealing with Netanyahu. Now, the situation in Gaza, I think that proved that not to be the case.
Okay,
is the same thing going?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, Ali, I just wanted to also ask you in terms of residents of not just southern Lebanon, away from all of the politics and all of who did what. You have people that have been forced out of their homes in southern Lebanon. On the Israeli side, you have those on those northern border towns that haven't been able to go home. But also now, more evacuations in Beirut. As a Beiruti resident yourself, what does that mean for you? And how worried are you in terms of this ceasefire ending and there being more airstrikes?
I'll start with the last part of your question. I have to say that a resumption of more intense firepower or more intense attacks against the capital Beirut can't be ruled out. It's not a certainty, but it can't be ruled out, and it's quite a real possibility, again, unfortunately. What happened today, by the way, was rather strange, the way the Israelis took the approach. There were 3 warning strikes or warning attacks, and then the Israelis carried out the actual strike on that building. Now, I don't find any other explanation behind that except for an attempt by the Israelis to terrorize Lebanese civilians. You know, the first time a warning, the second time, the third time, it's like they were playing on the nerves of the Lebanese people and terrorizing the Lebanese people. This is going to have a very disastrous impact, I think, on the Lebanese civilians. I heard your correspondent, Ali Hashim, addressing this issue before, saying that people haven't necessarily made their preparations for a new round of full-scale warfare. So there is going to be, I think, some immense human suffering. The people are going to be in a very, very damaged situation if the Israelis do resort once again to this full-scale war.
Yeah.
And I have to emphasize that can't be ruled out, a resumption of full-scale war. They might choose, by the way, it might be in the middle. What I mean but to say in the middle is that not necessarily the same intensity which we saw during that September to November, but kind of time-to-time strikes targeting the Lebanese capital, Beirut, and that's going to obviously take its toll as well.
Okay, thank you very much for speaking to us. Ali Rizk there, a journalist joining us there from Beirut. But we also want to speak to Yossi Beilin, who's the former Israeli Minister of Justice, joining us live now from Tel Aviv. Yossi, so we were hearing there some of the perspectives in Beirut, but we're also getting remarks from the French President Emmanuel Macron. He actually says now that he will speak to Israeli Prime Minister in the next 48 hours. How do you think that conversation is going to go?
Well, this is something that I don't know, but why 48 hours? I mean, we need something much more urgent in order to put an end to the eruption of violence in the last hours. Like always, I mean, Israel is saying that Hezbollah launched missiles against Kiryat Shmona in the north, and the retaliation was in Beirut. And we might see a resumption of the war, while I think that nobody wants it. I mean, I don't think that Israel wants to, I don't know what, conquer Beirut or destroy Beirut or something like that. It wants to show, I mean, the current government wants to show that if there is a breach of the ceasefire, Israel will not be idle. And it's enough. I mean, it's enough for I believe, for the current situation. And it is the time for the Americans and the French to be involved immediately, not in 48 hours, and tell the parties to stop this the fire. I mean, we know that the government of Lebanon is a peaceful government, and the president, the prime minister, the people, but they are in many ways hostages to Hezbollah, and what we have to do is to free them. But in the meantime, what is important is just to put an end to the current fire. We don't need it.
And Yossi, just going back to that point that you just mentioned there, the US. Now, actually, in addition to what Emmanuel Macron said, he also said that he will call the US President Donald Trump himself to discuss the Lebanon strikes. You were saying why 48 hours, within 48 hours, to speak to the Prime Minister of Israel. Do you think that's because he wants to have those discussions with the US first? And how much of a role is the US having under this administration when it comes to Lebanon and its influence on Israel as well?
It has an influence of Israel on Israel. It has an influence of Netanyahu personally, and it has to use this influence in order to pacify the situation. It is true for the current administration and to the former administration. The United States has much to say to the parties, and especially perhaps to Israel. For sure, President Macron has much to say to the Lebanese government, and both of them should work together as much as they can in order not to allow the fire to continue.
And just going back to those statements by the Lebanese president and his French counterpart, Macron had said that as part of the ceasefire deal, the Israelis shouldn't be stationed in, he specified 5 areas within Lebanon, and that would be considered a violation of the ceasefire. Why are the Lebanese, why are the Israeli troops still in Lebanese territory?
I'm sure that the government of Israel has very good answers to this question. I don't have ones.
Okay, and in terms of what the Lebanese president has been saying, he said that this isn't just a situation when it comes to the Israeli-Lebanese border situation, but this is actually has bigger implications, regional one. And he specifically said that as long as the Palestinians don't receive their rights and as long as the war continues in Gaza, these sort of situations will continue and that there needs to be a stability regionally. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as we all remember, Hezbollah launched a war against Israel on the 8th of October 23, and not because there were any friction between Israel and Lebanon, but because they wanted to identify with the Palestinians in Gaza. So the connection is there. And I think that all of us understand, or many of us at least, not all of us, but many of us understand that without solving the issue between Israel and the Palestinians, we cannot have real peace in the Middle East. Even if we have peace with some of the countries, which is very blessed and important, it's not enough. And we must, Palestinians and Israelis, sit together and find a solution. I believe that both of us know what the solution is.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Yossi Berlin in Tel Aviv.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.